All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar on IECC 2021 and the lighting portion of the code. This webinar will be recorded and the recording will be sent out to all attendees. If there are any issues with audio, just write me in the chat. My name is Erica DeLallo, and I'm a project manager for NORESCO. This series is sponsored by Colorado Energy Office with training materials created by Mozingo Code Group. As you see here, we've been working with the Colorado Energy Office to provide training just like this one. We've kind of only really got 4 more left on this list, but just met with a few of the trainers last week, and we're planning to add about another 10 more. So hopefully next week we'll have those defined, and we can have them on the schedule for you guys to register for. And then in addition to these webinar trainings, we also do tailored group trainings or technical assistance for jurisdictions that are updating the I-codes. Feel free to shoot me an email or reach out to one of the subject matter experts if you are interested in a specific training or want to talk about code adoption. And then in addition to the trainings, we've got a code adoption toolkit that reviews cost implications of changing code cycles, benefits, and a lot of other compliance resources. I'm currently going through and updating some of the language or adding language for IECC 2021. And then we have a troubleshooting guide that's for IECC 2018, covers I-code conflicts, alignments, passive compliance, and much more. Both of these resources can be accessed through the Colorado Energy Office's website. And then throughout the webinar today, we do want to encourage some questions. So please write in the chat or the Q&A function rather, and I'll let Shauna know at the end. The chat window can be used to chat among participants if you'd like. And there is also the ability to raise your hand and ask a question at the end of the presentation, and I can unmute you that way. And then lastly, there is a survey window that pops up following the webinar. Please take a minute to provide feedback. We use that feedback to develop future trainings and then also improve on the ones that we're doing now. So today's presenter is Shauna Mozingo, and Shauna is the president of Mozingo Code Group, as well as being a plans analyst and inspector for jurisdictions. Over the past 8 years, she's been involved in code adoption assistance, training to code officials, builders, energy raters, and designers, and she's a past president of the IECC Colorado chapter, and has served on the 2018 and 2021 committees, and I think even 2024 now. We're already looking ahead that far. So yeah. So with that, Shauna, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll let you take it from here.
All right, perfect. I think that will share my screen. All right.
Yep, that's good.
All right, perfect. Okay, well, we're going to talk about some lighting and daylighting today in the 2021 IECC. So a little bit about the lighting in some dwelling units versus sleeping units, the lighting controls, which is a big part of the lighting, turning those lights on and off. Daylighting, parking garage lighting, interior lighting power, that's the watts that we want to reduce. Exterior lighting, the new C406 additional efficiency requirements. A little bit about lighting plan review and inspections. Talk a bit about functional testing of those lighting controls. That's an important aspect that we want to talk about. Some additional information that I want to talk to you about when it comes to just the electric power, not necessarily lighting. QA and a wrap up. So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about today. But because we're kind of including all the lighting and daylighting, including controls and power densities, we're only going to cover the changes that are coming in 2021 and not all the real basics of energy code lighting. There are a lot of folks who are either new to energy codes or are specific to lighting design, inspection, plan review. So we're going to be adding a more in-depth lighting webinar down the road. Like Erica was talking about, we're going to add a couple webinars coming up. And so I'm excited to announce that one of those is lighting, and we're going to look into what we see in the field when we do functional testing and what we actually see on the plans, and a real look at how to make it all work. So stay tuned for that. But since this is new, I want to let you know that the first printing and the digital premium edition that is online do have some errors in them. So as we go through these lighting requirements, I'll point out a couple of things that working on with ICC and getting errata out in case you do have that 2021 edition that you've looked at for lighting, and just a couple of things. So we'll, as we go through, point out a couple of things in the lighting. So let's get started. All right, so lighting for sleeping units versus dwelling units. Reminder that when we talk about this, because we're in the commercial section of the code, that dwelling units we're talking about dwelling units in buildings 4 stories or more, unless you're in a jurisdiction that has amended their code and like Denver has amended their code for R2 dwelling units. All multifamily dwelling units are in commercial, but typically dwelling units for R2 dwellings are 3 stories or less are residential, 4 stories or more are commercial. So we just want to make sure that we're in the right dwelling units here. So what is the difference between a sleeping unit and a dwelling unit? They are defined terms. Whenever you're in the code book and you see a term in italics, that means that there's a definition to it. And so you want to make sure that you're using those definition section, which is chapter 2 in the code book, because there are a lot of things that you can find in there, especially in the energy code book. We use those definitions in there a lot more than we do in a lot of other code books. So a dwelling unit is a single unit providing complete independent living facilities for 1 or more person, including permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. So I might have this, even if it's a little outbuilding in my garage or something, if it has cooking and sanitation, eating, sleeping, living, it is a dwelling unit. A sleeping unit might be a hotel room. It might be a hospital room. A sleeping unit is defined as a room or space in which people sleep that can include permanent provisions for living, eating, and either sanitation or kitchen facilities, but not both. Such rooms and spaces that are part of a dwelling unit are not sleeping units. So just because I have a bed in my dwelling unit does not mean that I count that bed as a sleeping unit. It's all part of the dwelling unit. So as we go through and we talk about the requirements for sleeping unit lighting, we're talking about those R1s, or like a hotel or motel rooms or hospital rooms or different things for that. So making sure that we keep those separate. So here we're going to look at our first errata, our first error in the code, right? So we've had this in the code for a while. Sleeping units comply with section C40524 and either 4051 or 4053. This has been in there for a while. It looks new because it says comply with either 40524 daylight controls and you either comply with the residential lighting's high efficient light bulbs or the lights per square foot requirement. Well, this is an errata. What happened was it kept the old language C40524. That is not what it meant to say. Which makes it look like you now have to have daylight responsive controls in your sleeping units. That's not what it meant to say. It just kept the old code section. It meant to say the same thing that it's always said, specific application controls. It's just that specific application controls is in a new section. So there's going to be an errata. If you have the first printing, look for a new errata. C40525 is specific application controls. So there's really no change to this section at all. Just they put the wrong section in there. And that wrong section, C40524, is printed all over in the code. So working with IECC to just clean that up all throughout there. As I was making this class, I found this error, and it is all over in there. Some places they have the right section, and some places they have the wrong section. So we're working to get that all cleaned up. So really no change to sleeping unit lighting, just making sure that they get the right thing. It's just saying, really, sleeping unit lighting and dwelling unit lighting are a lot the same. It's just worded differently. It's the same but different. They both have to have specific application controls. What that's saying is anything that's not their regular lighting, their main lighting, anything that's maybe a display light or a task light or whatever, has to be on its own control. All of their main lights have to either meet the dwelling unit lighting of a house, like the residential lighting, meaning have high 90% of the lights have to be highly efficient, or they have to go into those tables that we're going to talk about further on and meet the lights per square foot. So either do residential lighting at high 90% have to be high efficient, or go meet the lighting requirements in the lighting tables, and then do your specific application controls and put all the rest of your lighting on a separate control so that they can be turned off separately from all of your other lighting. So they both have to meet the same requirements, just worded differently. So don't forget to look for your errata in that. So that's dwelling and sleeping. Let's look at all of your other lighting controls. The majority of that is occupancy sensors and things. But first thing I want to point out in lighting controls, you're going to see, if you're used to, if you get the printed version of the book, you're going to see a lot of black lines when it comes to lighting. Black lines means there's a change, right? If you're in the new premium version online, you're going to see a lot of blue words, which means it's new text. So I want to point this out, that the first thing you're going to see is that it's not that there's technical changes. What happened was a complete reorganization of this lighting section, which was really needed. So Jack Bailey from the Association of Lighting Designers and Glenn Heinmiller with the International Association of Lighting Designers got together and really cleaned up the controls section. Specifically, the existing section that dealt with lighting reduction controls. So in their own words, they said that the existing section wasn't straightforward. One of the biggest reasons is that it included scoping and technical requirements for two different energy saving strategies, switching lights off by time scheduling and light reduction controls to allow occupants to operate lights at a lower level. The applicability of the requirements for the two strategies is kind of similar, but they're not identical. So it resulted in a lot of complicated exceptions. So the changes that they made kind of untangled all those requirements by putting the light reduction controls in their own new section. So it really dramatically improved the reading of both of those sections. So like I said, it didn't change the requirements at all. It just really was editorial and cleaned it all up. It was such a great job. I was on that commercial committee hearing these changes, and I just remember thinking, I even testified, like, this was a long overdue change to get this all cleaned up like this. So like I said, you're going to see a lot of black lines, a lot of new blue text, but nothing changed throughout there. It was just cleanup. So that's the first thing I'll show you. Now, when it comes to occupancy sensors, yes, there were some changes. There were some added requirements for occupancy sensors in corridors. Now, there were some controls to uniformly reduce the lighting power to not more than 50% of full power within 20 minutes of people leaving the space. And then there, of course, is an exception for corridors provided with less than 2-foot candles of illumination at the darkest point with all the lights. Now, there's some reasons for all this, so let me just like kind of unpack all this. There is an argument that there should be one uniform requirement for occupancy sensor control of lights in corridors. You know, we've had this requirement for different sizes of places, different corridors. We had the requirement if you're for spaces 300 square feet or less, or different sizes of rooms. And so the idea that all corridors should be created equal. So this would allow for lights to remain continuously on at a reduced level to alleviate the safety concerns about people entering dark corridors before the lights would turn on. So this would allow corridor lighting to remain on at 50% when unoccupied, to avoid a conflict. There's a conflict with the IBC, which requires that lighting in corridors be maintained at a minimum of 1-foot candle at the darkest point when spaces served by the corridor are occupied. So if I'm walking down the corridor and there's space somewhere along that corridor that's occupied, the IBC required that there always be at least 1-foot candle at the darkest point in the corridor. And so the IECC and the IBC had a conflict, and so this takes that conflict away. Another nice thing about it is also that it's technology neutral, because it requires 50% reduction in lighting power, but it doesn't specify whether it's achieved by switching alternate fixtures or if it's uniformly dimming of all the fixtures. It's not giving a specific technology. It's just saying to reduce it by 50%. So that's kind of nice. Also, there's a new manual control requirement to allow occupants to turn off the lights that was added, but with a great exception for full automatic on control, with no manual control to be permitted in corridors, interior parking areas, stairways, restrooms, locker rooms, things like that, where manual operation would endanger occupant safety and security. So some good things that came in with these safety concerns. Now, these occupancy sensor control functions that came in the 2018 for warehouse storage area, this came in, we have these big, huge warehouses, and we didn't want all the lights to just be on all of the time. So requirements came in 2018 to try to cut some of this lighting down. And that didn't change. We just added some more requirements, as new things come in, just kind of fine tune them each cycle. So the lighting in each aisleway has to be controlled independently of other aisleways and of the open areas. The occupancy sensors have to automatically reduce the lighting power within each control area to an occupant set point of no more than 50% within 20 minutes after somebody leaving the area. Lights that are not turned off by the occupancy sensor have to be turned off by a time switch, one or the other. And then, of course, as with most of them, manual control shall be provided to allow occupants to turn off the lights in the space. So, basically just saying, if I walk down this aisle, it shouldn't turn all the lights on over here. If you walk down one aisle, the controls need to be such that it doesn't allow all the lights to turn on. We're separately controlled. Just trying to fine tune how we work in warehouses. Same with open office areas. Not that it'll be interesting how we treat open office areas moving forward. So it was a big move to have open office areas. I don't know how the pandemic has affected how we do open office areas anymore. But we're just fine-tuned it. So occupancy sensor control function in open office spaces over 300 square feet. Number one, required control zones not greater than 600 square feet that would be separately controlled. That didn't change. There was a change that now says that the general lighting in each control zone be permitted to automatically turn on upon occupancy within that control zone, and general lighting in other unoccupied zones within the open space be permitted to turn on to no more than 20% of the full power or remain unaffected. Let's see, what else changed in there? It's still, the lights have to turn off within 20 minutes of the occupants leaving, but it did add a new exception for general lighting to be turned off by a time switch. It added an exception if you don't have to turn off within 20 minutes if you do the time switch. So that's very common. And then number 4, the requirement was revised to say that general lighting in each of those control zones has to turn off uniformly or reduce the lighting power to an unoccupied set point of no more than 20% of full power within 20 minutes. So just fine tuning it. Again, it came in 2018, just gonna keep fine tuning those requirements. Light reduction, again, really didn't change. Just a reminder that if you're in that book, you're going to see all those black lines. It'll be a lot of blue text in the online version. It's just because of that reorganization that we talked about earlier. It's just saying that if you don't have occupancy sensors and you don't have those time switches, that you have to have light reduction controls to allow people to turn down their lighting by at least 50% in a reasonably uniform manner. And then there are exceptions for spaces with daylighting or specific application controls with low lighting levels. And there are exceptions for safety reasons and things like that. You have to give people a way to shut the lights down if they want to. So, all right, daylighting. This one, I don't know why, freaks a lot of people out, but I think that each cycle they're getting it to where it's easier to understand. Again, we're not going to go over everything daylighting, just the changes, but there were a few. I like to go over all the times we don't have to have daylighting. So we're going to do that first. Let me just remind you when you don't have to have it. So remember that daylighting is covered under envelope provisions. Envelope provisions kind of tell us when we have to have daylighting and when we don't, and lighting tells us when we do and don't. So it's covered under both. There's a lot of things envelope when you talk about glazing requirements that drive daylighting, and then lighting design that drives daylighting. So remember to look in both of those places in the code. But here's times when that you're exempt: spaces in healthcare facilities where patient care is directly provided. Side lit daylight zones, so side lit next to a window, a vertical glazing. In the first floor above group A2 and group M occupancies. So A2 is A is assembly, A2 is for food and or drink like restaurants, bars, casinos. And for M occupancy, so M is mercantile or retail. So we're not going to mess with the daylighting in for ambiance lighting or sales lighting. We're just not going to mess with those on the first floor above those. And then new buildings where basically where you're going to have a really excellent lighting design. There's this calculation that they have a equation 49, and you're reducing lighting using C4, some options in C406. It's really boiling down to you're doing such a great job of your lighting design that you're doing such low wattages. There are some exceptions where you do not have to do daylighting. So those are just some of the options out of daylighting requirements. There are some others in the envelope provisions as well, but just reminding you. All right, now let's look at some of the changes. So one of the first changes we see is now kind of going over to that ASHRAE 90.1 step where we have a primary daylight zone and we have a secondary daylight zone. We still have our toplit daylight zone, which is a daylighting under a skylight. But now for our side-lit daylight zone next to a window, we have a primary daylight zone and a secondary daylight zone. So we're getting further in. So we have that. We're going to look at that in a minute. But some other changes. There are clarifications that lights in the primary side-lit daylight zone have to be controlled independently of those in the secondary daylight zone. And then I'm going to read you this requirement because this is what the code, how the code reads, and then I'm going to tell you what it says. Okay. So here's what the code, how the code reads. When occupancy sensor controls have reduced the lighting power to an unoccupied set point in accordance with section C405212 through C405214, daylight responsive controls shall continue to adjust electric light levels in response to available daylight, but shall be configured to not increase the lighting power above the specified unoccupied set point. What is that saying? What that's saying, and this drives home my point of testing your lighting controls that we'll get to later on. If I have a room like this that you see, and I have daylight coming in, and maybe I have a requirement for some daylight responsive controls, but I also have maybe a requirement for some occupancy sensors. So I have occupancy sensor over here that's saying, hey, I don't have any more occupants in the room. And in 20 minutes, my lights are going to shut off because there's no more occupants in the room. But I have all this light coming in and I have some daylight responsive controls. And oh, the sun's going down. And so my daylight sensor control is going to say, hey, the lights need to come on because there's no more daylight. But wait a minute, there's no people in the room. So the lights need to stay off. But wait, there's no more light. So the lights need to come on. Oh, what is going on? This section is saying the lights are saying, no, there's no people in the room. The lights need to not come on. These occupancy sensors still need to respond to daylight, but they need to be configured to not overrule. They need to still be configured to not overrule the occupancy sensors, to not increase the lighting power above the unoccupied set point. That's what it's trying to tell you. The daylight control needs to be configured to not be set above the unoccupied set point so that they don't turn the light on just because there's no daylight when this one has turned them off because there's no people. That's what that's trying to say. So that's why, you know, me as a building inspector, I go out there and I'm like, am I the one who should be determining if those really work? I can say, yes, you're supposed to have them. Yes, they're installed in the right place. Yes, this one works. Yes, this one works. But am I looking to see that they are doing what they're supposed to and they're not fighting each other? Yeah, probably not. That's why we have that rule that says they need to be functionally tested and that they actually work together the way that they're supposed to. So that's a good thing that got brought into the code. Some other things that got brought into the code is like in this room, if I had daylight, if I have, you know, daylight zones on this wall and I had them on this other wall, they're supposed to be controlled separately on different orientations. But it does say if I have, you know, 150 watts, if I have 100 up to 150 watts within each one, they could be controlled together. Up to 150 watts within the primary zone, of 150 watts in a primary and 150 watts in the secondary could be together, and 150 watts in of each orientation can be done together. So there's that is also some new exceptions. All right, this is nice that these pictures are in the code. They got these right out of the code showing you, oops, whoa, what the new primary and secondary daylight zones look like. So this is a section view. So the primary zone is still the same as it has been. You measure the zone from the floor to the top of the window, lay it in on its side. That's a primary daylight zone. And then the secondary daylight zone is the same size, just right next to it. So now you have double the amount of daylight zone that we used to have. We used to just have this daylight zone. Now we have 2 daylight zones. So we're going to look at requirements for this first zone, second zone. This is the plan view. So you're looking at 2 feet on each side of the window, and then your zones in each side. Just reminding you that the burden of proof is on the designer to, when you're submitting your plans, to show the code official where your daylight zones are. It really is up to you, to the designer, to show your plan view of these daylight zones and to show that you don't have more than 150 watts of lighting in each one, because that's really the big kicker of when these daylight zones daylight controls are required. If you put more than 150 watts of lighting right here, you have to have a daylight responsive control to shut the lights off when there's enough light coming in. There are other things that kick in daylight responsive controls, but that's the big one, is don't put so much lighting in that zone. Otherwise, you have to put a control in there. And then you have to control them separately. And if you had a window here, then you'd have to count those separately. And so there's a lot in there, and it's really it's not up to the code official to pull out the plans and to start measuring all of these and to try to find them. This burden of proof becomes on the designer to submit the daylight zones and to tell how much watts is in each of those daylight zones and where those controls are. So just letting everybody be ready for that, right? All right, here's another new one. Atriums. New section that says daylight zones at an atrium space shall be established at the top floor and the bottom. There's not on intermediate floors. So you'll have a daylight zone at the top and you'll have a daylight zone at the bottom, but not at intermediate floors. It's kind of measured the same as you would at a daylight zone for a skylight with the 7/10 the ceiling height. But it's not, and there's a section C405244, so it tells you how to measure all of this. But this picture is right in the code, so this is figure C405244. But this is new for 2021. It's a lot like daylight zone under a top-lit daylight zone. So you don't have to worry about it in the intermediate floors, but at the top floor and the bottom. So that is new. All right, the other only other new control requirement is for task lighting. And so task lighting is just saying, you know, specific application controls. Specific application is, you know, it's just saying that it gives you this list that says the following lighting has to be controlled by occupancy sensor or a time switch control. And then in addition, a manual control has to be provided to control the lighting separately from all the general lighting in the space. And it gives a list of like display and accent and task lighting, you know, food warming lighting, lighting that's for sale, and display lighting. Have it on separate lighting so that, because it's not usually on the same amount of time, and so you want to be able to shut it off before you shut all your other lighting off. It just added display lighting for exhibits and galleries and museums and monuments, and then it added medical and dental purpose lighting in addition lighting for medical and dental purposes in addition to the general lighting. So it just added a couple more things to the list. All right, parking garage. this is new to 2021. So parking garage lighting control is this new section that requires occupancy sensor control or automatic time switch shut off for parking garages. It also it has like additional lighting controls to reduce, that's the word. Reduce light by at least 30% when there's no activity detected in the garage within 20 minutes. And that's in lighting zones. So it's just like the warehouse spaces and the open office spaces. We're going to create zones, but these zones are no more than 3,600 square feet. So trying to cut those parking garages into smaller spaces so that we don't have lights on in the whole thing. So if there's no activity in a 3,600 square foot area within 20 minutes, then those lights shut down by at least 30%. Not going to go off because we want to maintain some safety in there, but cuts them down by at least 30%. Then at those places where you go in and out of the garage, there's usually some lighting there for eye adaptation so that you're not just like, go from from dark to light. So there's some lighting there, but it's just saying that lighting used for eye adaptation at the entrances and exits have to be controlled separately by controls that automatically reduce it by 50% from sunset to sunrise. And then any powered luminaires within 20 feet of the perimeter wall. So from the perimeter wall to 20 feet in, power to reduce power to luminaires within 20 feet of the perimeter wall openings must automatically reduce in response to daylight by 50%. So basically doing some daylight responsive controls, and there are some exceptions to that, right? To that for where a certain window to wall areas, certain things that might block how much daylight comes in, maybe a building next door, and depending on how close it is, or some things that might block how much daylight comes in. There's exceptions to that, but trying to just say, if you have this much opening and there's a lot of daylight, that a certain amount going in, some of those lights don't need to be on. And so parking garage being looked at a little bit differently now. All right, interior lighting power, fun. Really, this section, what I found interesting was when we were writing this code, we were hearing the changes in 2018 and 2019. So it was pre-pandemic, but there was a change that went in that was for antimicrobial lighting. And so it was interesting. There was a new exception for antimicrobial lighting that because it's found that there's antimicrobial lighting that kills the germs on surfaces and that they're using a lot in schools and hospitals. So that there's an exception, number 20 now, into all the lighting that doesn't have to be counted into your general lighting wattages per square foot. So just saying that kind of lighting doesn't have to be counted into your calculations. So that's a new exception that got added into there. In both your space by space and your building area methods, they went in there and did a they just revised it to add a step-by-step method on how to calculate it for those people who don't use ComCheck or to do lighting, and they just want to know here's a step-by-step how to do the lighting calculations. So that was kind of cool. On both methods they did that. You can see here by the crossouts that a lot of the wattages, based on technology, a lot of those wattages got tightened down because the technology has been changing, and so a lot of them got tightened down. I will say that there are a couple that actually went up because they just found that they were too tight. They went down too far in 2018. So a couple went up, but not very many. Most of them got went down. But a couple of changes that I do want to note are on like tenant finishes, or if you have a space that is getting that is like, if you have a corn shell and you have some spaces that are getting left unfinished, that's where some of the changes really are getting looked at that never got looked at before. Let's just say it that way. So if you have, there's a change for interior lighting power allowance that says, you know, to add requirements that unfinished spaces or projects that only involve portions of a building have to use the space by space method. You can't use the total building area method. You have to do space by space when you calculate your lighting power density. And also, if you have an unfinished unfinished space, and you use the space by space method, because you have to, your lighting power density has to be the total connected lighting power, or 0.2 watts per square foot, whichever is less. So let me just read you the reason statement that the proponent put in there, because I think this is important to understand why they made this change in order to understand that code section. So here's the reason statement. The proposal clarifies how lighting power allowance is to be determined for core and shell buildings. This is the source of much legitimate confusion. While there are a variety of strategies for permitting and obtaining a certificate of occupancy in core and shell buildings with unfinished spaces, we are concerned about one scenario in particular, where tenant spaces are provided with minimal lighting to meet the egress requirements of the IBC so that a permit can be closed out, with the intention that this lighting will be replaced when a tenant leases the space and does their own fit out with permanent lighting. In these situations, it's quite easy to game the code by taking an allowance for the intended use of the space, i.e. retail, office, whatever, while only counting the minimal lighting that is installed to obtain a C of O. This is a major loophole. This change requires that a space-by-space method be used for buildings with unfinished spaces. The building area method cannot be used in this case, because the power allowance for each building area type are based on the allocation of space types in a typical building of that building type, office or retail, and it is assumed that all spaces are finished. The space-by-space method is the only way to break out the unfinished space and assign a power allowance for it. The proposal language will be clear in all instances and will prevent people from claiming a credit for fictitious savings in lighting power in unfinished spaces. So it is true, when people go to pull a permit and they say, well, we're not going to finish that space, we get 1 watt per square foot because we were office, or let's see, if an office was 0.64 watts per square foot, so we get 0.64 watts per square foot, but we weren't going to finish it, we were only going to put a little bit of lighting in there, but we get 0.64 watts per square foot because the building is an office, and they weren't going to put that in there. And so now it's saying, wait a minute, you have to do space by space method, and you have to put in 0.2 watts per square foot, or whatever that space was being used for, whichever is less. And so you won't be able to game it anymore. And so that's why they did it that way. So that's a big change. Lumens are for humans, right? That's my friend Sean Deniston from MBI. Back when we were writing, I don't know, the 12 or the 15, I think we were sitting down one time and he was trying to explain how plants see lights different than humans. And he was explaining these lumens are for humans to me. So this is new to the 2021 lighting for plant growth and maintenance. It's a new section requiring that at least 95% of the permanently installed luminaires used for plant growth and maintenance have a photon efficiency of not less than 1.6 micromole per joule. There you go, say that real fast. As defined in accordance with ANSI ASABE S640. So what this is just saying is lumens are what we see, is how we see light. Lumens are essentially a measure of brightness based on how humans see light. Plants perceive light differently. From a plant's perception, light that is useful for photosynthesis is not bright. It's just a different set of things. So when you talk about how many lumens, that's how we see it. So they don't talk about it that way. So there's a different set of requirements now in there for plant growth. So we have all of these grow facilities now that never had any lighting requirements, and now they do. Lighting for daylighting, exterior lighting. Really, exterior lighting revised to include a step-by-step approach to calculate, just like the interior method. Just gave you that, here's how you calculate it. Other than that, nothing changed. The big changes were in 2018, where they just overhauled all those tables. Exterior lighting technologies is far advanced of the code. It's been a while since I've seen exterior lighting that hasn't exceeded code compliance considerably by probably 50% or more. When I've looked at exterior lighting, I haven't seen an exterior lighting fail, in a long time. The thing that you have to look for is the controls. The controls section hasn't changed, but it's just that you just want to make sure that they have those controls that shut the lights off when it's daylight outside. That's the thing. The biggest thing is make sure they have their photo sensors or their time controls that shut those lights off when it's daylight outside. That's what you want to pay attention to, but that section hasn't changed. This is what's changed. C406, right? Lighting and the additional efficiency requirements. It used to be you had these 8 options. If you went with IECC in any path other than performance, you had to pick one of these additional efficiency package options. Better mechanical, better envelope, better lighting controls, something. Now it is a points system, right? Completely redid the entire section of the code to make it into a points-based system, requiring new buildings to achieve 10 credits from various tables based on occupancy. So if a building has multiple uses, then the floor area has to be weighted by the area of each group to determine the weighted average of the credits. Points are based on climate zone and the use of the building. So giving more weight to the more efficient, so if I'm in a cooling climate, it's going to give me more points or more weight for higher efficient cooling equipment. If I'm in a heating dominated climate like Colorado, then I'm going to get more points for maybe better heating or something, or renewables or something like that. So there's just different things. Let's look at maybe what I might get for lighting. So it's based on different climates. You can't see in this, let's see if I see up here, it gives you the climate zones. So we're going to look over at this end of the table for 5, 6, 7 and that. So it's broken by occupancy and by things. I just pulled out the lighting. There's reduced lighting power, enhanced lighting controls, and maybe some renewables. So I just pulled that out. We're going to look at this end is probably climate zone 5, 6, 7, and 8. So if I'm in a B occupancy office or something, I could get almost all of my points just by reducing my lighting power densities, better watts per square foot. Maybe get a couple extra points by getting better lighting controls. I could get almost all 10 of my points right here. Right? If I'm an R occupancy or an I'm not going to get very much of my lighting control. I'm not going to get very much of my points in lighting. I might have to look at my table and see, maybe I'm going to get better in ventilation or mechanical or something. If I'm an E, education, I'm going to get most of my points in lighting. I can get almost all 10 of my points in lighting. If I'm a retail, a mercantile, I can get all of mine by lowering my lighting power densities. right? So it's just saying, you know, you have to get 10 points. There's a bunch of different options. Let's look at, this is the table for, or partial table for that R occupancy. I just wanted to throw it up here to see where I could get more of my points, since I can't get very many in lighting. Maybe water heating, recovered or renewable water heating. I could get a lot of points. I could get some in efficient fossil fuel water heating. I could get some reduced air infiltration in these warmer climates. So you just look at that and see, you know, I could pick out 2, 3, 4, 5 items, as long as whatever it takes to get to my 10 points. So that's how that new efficiency package option works. But we wanted to focus on lighting, so we could get almost all, other than our occupancies, I could get all the way there just by getting better lighting. So that's good to know. Plan review and inspection. The only thing I just want to say real quick on this is, you know, until the 2021 ComCheck comes out, it'll be hard to verify compliance with lighting for a lot of people who really rely on ComCheck for lighting verification. PNNL usually focuses on ASHRAE ComCheck first, and then Res Check, and then the IECC ComCheck, so it'll be a bit before that one comes out. That doesn't mean you can't verify lighting requirements until then, because 2021 did a good job of laying out that step-by-step way of calculating lighting loads. It's really not hard at all to sum up the amount of the lighting watts per square foot, but the burden of proof is on the designer, not the code official. So ask to see those lighting load calculations and spot check them. If you question them, send them to me and I'll help you. I love it when people try to learn, so I'll help. Now, if you want me to review everything, then we're going to have a different conversation. If you're a designer and you want to learn, you know, how to put them on plans, then let's do that. If you, you know, let's work together. I'm happy to help however you want. If you're an inspector, here's what I say, you know, don't think for a minute that we're all out there counting light bulbs. Spot check. If you find discrepancies, start asking questions. If you get, what I do is I ask questions. You know, if I get some that are wrong, I start asking questions and I start looking. And then if I get more wrong, then I fail inspections. Of course I do. But if I get some right, then I move on. I don't count every light bulb. I look at the plans. Do they have the right fixtures that they said that they were doing? Do they have the right controls? You know, if I start seeing discrepancies, then I start failing things, but I'm not counting every single light bulb in a room, right? But I don't test controls either. I make sure that they have somebody testing those controls. I do. If I see a ComCheck done to ASHRAE, I look at I'm looking for controlled outlets, and I'm looking for energy monitoring systems, because those are mandatory requirements in ComCheck. But guess what? Now in IECC, I'm going to look for those too, because those are requirements in IECC 2021. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But there's just some things when you're going to get used to looking for, and we're going to talk about that more in that next webinar on lighting. So be ready for that. Commissioning functional controls. This is buried in C408 that most people associate with mechanical commissioning, but lighting control commissioning requirements are in there. So prior to passing a final inspection, the registered design professional or approved agency has to provide evidence that the lighting control systems have been tested to ensure that the hardware and software are calibrated, adjusted, programmed, in working condition, right? So applies to occupancy sensors, time switches, and daylight responsive controls. They all have to work together. Those are the ones that can mess each other up. So they all have to work together. And don't forget that that commissioning checklist that's in C408, it has a line item for testing of lighting controls. The construction documents are supposed to include the location of the controls, the catalog number, so that the guy testing knows that they've used the right number or the right piece of equipment that was designed, right? So just making sure that the owner is set up for success, the building maintenance staff is set up for success, and that the functional testing person is set up for success. All right, speaking of controlled outlets and monitoring in 2021, in case I didn't get your attention on that, the automatic receptacle controls are required in 2021. at least 50% of the 125 volt, 1520 amp receptacles installed in offices, conference rooms, lots of places. I just want you to know we don't have a lot of time left, but automatic receptacle controls are now required in the 2021 IECC as they were in ASHRAE 90.1. Same with energy monitoring. There are different ways, you can do different 50% of the outlets or 50% of each outlet. There are different ways to identify these. New buildings with a gross conditional floor area of 25,000 square feet or larger have to be equipped to measure, monitor, record, and report energy consumption data in compliance with 40512. So that's, and there's an exception for R2 occupancies and individual tenant spaces. There's some exceptions for energy monitoring, but those are new requirements. So just throwing that out there as a additional info. It's not part of the lighting, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but it just brings me to my next point that people used to use IECC. This came up to me today as a question, so I threw it in here real quick. People used to use IECC to not have to do these things in ASHRAE 90.1. Now IECC isn't set apart from ASHRAE 90.1. So I believe we're going to start seeing more and more people using 90.1. We're going to need to start doing probably some 90.1 webinars, and we've talked about that. So needs to start getting familiar with IECC and 90.1 and how they're both used, how they're both laid out, how they work for you as a designer, how they work for you as a code official, because we're going to start seeing them being used more and more, I believe. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Whew, that was a lot of info. Sorry about that. 2021 is a lot of info. We're going to do more in-depth later. This was just changes. What are your questions?
Thanks, Shauna. That was great. We do have one question so far, but if there are other questions, please write in the Q&A function. Shauna and I will be on until 1 p.m. today. So first question for you, Shauna. Does the new occupancy sensor rule allow for lighting to be on continuously, but at a lower lighting level in corridors also count for stairwells, or is it just corridors?
No, there is yes, stairways, yes, stairwells. Yes, there is an yes, it does count for stairwells as well, I believe. I just read that. Again, I was going to bring it up. I don't know if you're, can you see that? Is your screen sharing? Is your screen?
No, I only the presentation.
I was gonna new share. Let me share this. Now, do you see my code book?
Yes.
Okay, so I was gonna show you this. This is the new online version. It's amazing. I love it. Because these little sections show you the code proposal that put the thing in place. And this shows you a video of the code proposal being heard on the floor. The blue wording is anything new. It's just great. It's wonderful. But so you can see all of the new requirements. So this is great. We were talking about what section? Daylight or occupancy sensors. It's occupancy sensors in warehouses, occupancy sensors in open office, occupancy in core. So occupancy sensors reduce lighting no more than 50, 20 minutes, corridors. Oh, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that about in stairwells. That's the whole code section right there.
Okay. We do have another question, Shauna. Are data lighting controls required in remodels and TI construction?
Are daylighting controls required in remodels? They could be. It doesn't say that it's only for new construction. It depends on what you're doing. That's not like that's not like a lot of, it depends on what you're doing, right? It's so they're provided in within daylight zones in the following. It doesn't say it's only for new construction, right? If you create a situation where you're putting more than 150 watts next to a window and you're creating this daylight zone that creates this, then yes. The only time it gives you an exception for new buildings is if it's a new building where you're doing this one thing. So it does apply to existing buildings where you're remodeling. And then I didn't get the
Okay.
second half of that question.
Yeah, it's just TIs,
Okay,
which
yeah.
I think it applies to as well.
Mhm.
Okay, we've got a raised hand here from Stephen. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk, Stephen. You are muted. If you want to unmute yourself, you feel free to ask.
Hi, this is Andres actually from Jordan Scala Engineers. I had the same question with the stairwells, but I wanna, like those occasions that you have a garage with the stairwells in the corner, like I think we have to apply the code there with the new requirements. For sure, I wonder if I have more information about the stairwells.
Right. I think that you bring up a good point, especially because I think that would bring in the exceptions for occupancy sensors where you would have, let me bring the main part where occupancy sensors would not be required, where occupant safety or would come into play, or where there would be a hazard or any of that. I mean, I think that you would right here, where operation would endanger occupant safety or security. I mean, you would always have that to fall back on. And then you also have anything in the IBC that would require you to have a set amount of lighting for egress that you would always have to fall back on. So we would never require occupancy sensors in a place where the IBC would require you to have a set amount of light. Right. And so I don't think, like when you're explaining a parking garage or a garage where you have a stairwell for egress, I could see that you would definitely not have, you might have an occupancy sensor that sets the lighting back to, like in parking garages, where even in the parking garage, it says, it doesn't shut the lights off. It shuts it to 30%,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't shut it off. So I could see that you could still use that to 30%.
Yes. Yeah, that's one thing that I was wondering, because those parking garage stairs, you had like leads of 15 of 20-foot candles, but you don't want to use all that all the time,
Right.
So
Yeah.
okay, so
that would definitely, those are things that I would definitely look at and say, okay, yeah, we want to save some energy, but we want to save lives first.
Yeah.
So, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Shauna, we've got another couple questions for you.
Sure.
Is the 150 watts in the primary daylighting zone the total wattage? And is that for a specific minimum area?
I have to understand what that question is. So first of all, is the 150 watts. Let me get to where you're talking about. So spaces with a total of more than 150 watts within the daylight zone complying with 424. Let's give me 2424, right? But I'm.
It sounds like it's for the total wattage just within that daylighting zone. So.
Right. So each daylight zone is allowed up to 150. If you go more than 150 watt within that zone, you have to have a daylight responsive control to shut the lights off when there's enough light coming in the window. Right? So that's 150 watts. But I guess I don't understand the second half of that question.
The minimum area.
Can you just read?
It sounds like it's dependent on what the size is of your primary daylighting zone.
Can you just read the question again?
Okay, so it is the 150 watts in the primary daylighting zone. The total wattage was the first one, and then is that for a specific minimum area?
It's for yes. I mean, if I'm understanding right, it is for. Let me find that. I guess I should go back to my slides instead of messing around. It's for that specific area, that specific daylight zone, which is from depending on the size of your window, right? So if it's from the floor to the top of the window, not the size of it, from the floor to the top of the window laid on its side. So that's that daylight zone. And if you looked at the plan, it's 2 feet on both sides. So that daylight zone and 2 feet, that's the size of your window. It shows you how to measure it in here. But so for that area, 150 watts in that specific zone. And then if you had another window next to it, it'd be that window. And then, so 150 for that window area, and you'd have it for every window area.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay, one more question for you, Shauna. Would we use Chapter 5 of the IECC and IEBC to determine compliance within existing buildings?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. There is Chapter 5. Yes, that's a great point. So you would use Chapter 5. A lot of times when you get to Chapter 5 and get to Chapter 5 and it gets into lighting, depending on if it's additions, alterations, a lot of times when it says if you have new lighting systems, it sends you right back to Chapter 4. But it does, it says new lighting systems that are installed as a part of an addition have to comply with 405. So it sends you back there, but yes, for an alteration, it does give you a little bit of outs, but it does tell you lighting systems go right back to 405, but yes.
All right, great. Thank you, Shauna, and thank you to everyone who attended today. This next week, we do have another webinar. I am blanking on what it is, but I think it's Advanced Amendments. Advanced Amendments is next week. So feel free to join us for that. And if you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me or Shauna.
Yeah, awesome.
And we do have a question, is a copy of the presentation available? If you, Shauna, are able to send me PDFs of the slides, and then I'll also be posting the recording too.
Sounds great. Will do.